Tens of thousands of Israelis joined the protest movement this last weekend, but these protesters were there to voice their support for judicial reforms. In an event that hardly got any media coverage last week, 50,000 Israelis marched in Samaria to support life. And I actually agree with CNN for once. I'm Josiah, and this is the Israel Guys. Welcome to the Israel Guys, where we believe that in a world of Jew hatred and anti-Israel propaganda, you should have a direct connection to the land and people of Israel. Welcome back to the show, guys. We had a big week last week. It was the holiday of Passover here in Israel, as well as coinciding with the Muslim holiday of Ramadan and also Easter, all happening. So a lot of people, we got to go to Jerusalem last week. A lot of people in Jerusalem had a great time there. So make sure, first off, subscribe. We really appreciate that. Hit that subscribe button. Also, the like button really helps us out, even if it doesn't seem like much for you to do. But hitting that like button really tells YouTube that you like our videos and they're going to put it before more people. So we definitely appreciate that. Also, throw a comment down below where you're watching from. If you're a new subscriber, just found our channel, just found this content, you love Israel, throw that down in the comments. We love interacting with you guys there. Guys, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, Facebook, all of those. And we're putting content out every day about what is happening here in Israel. All right, so just this last weekend, there were thousands. Again, there's been protests that have been happening in the streets of Tel Aviv, all across a lot of cities in Israel for the last 2-3 months now. And we actually went to those protests. We've covered that extensively. But we're seeing an uptick in protesters, guys, Israelis going out and actually protesting for the judicial reforms, not just the anti-reforms and the people that call themselves anti-reforms, which, as we've seen, it's more, there's more anti-government protesters than actual just anti-reform protesters out there. But we're seeing an uptick. And just this last weekend, there were the organizers of some of these right-wing protests said that there were reported that tens of thousands of Israelis showed up across Israel to voice their support for judicial reform, their support for the government's actions to push the judicial reform through. So just a couple weeks ago, after the, what we like to say, the anarchists won out, when Netanyahu announced to freeze the reforms after these anti-reform protesters went out and basically tried to shut down the country to force Netanyahu into capitulating, which indeed he actually did. Which he didn't stop them completely. He did freeze them, which is a plus. But he did stop the reform. So right after that happened, that same night, he freezed the reform. There were the pro-reform camp here in Israel, the more right-wing. They actually held a rally at the Knesset for the government, saying, no, we want this to happen. We want this to go through. And there were around 100,000, at least 100,000 protesters there. Some sources say there were 200,000 protesters there that night. It's not really sure. Probably weren't that many. But there were quite a few guys that voiced their support just out of, just as several hours notice, saying we're going to hold this rally in support of the judicial reform after Netanyahu announced that he was going to freeze it. And tens of thousands, 100,000 people showed up at the Knesset to voice their support. So there is a large voice here in Israel that has largely been silent over the last several months that support judicial reform. And the reason I think they've been silent is because the government is pushing forward what they want to happen. And as we've seen, we talked about it before, this government was democratically elected. They received the majority, and one of the things they campaigned on was judicial reforms. And the left will try to tell you that it's not, and that nobody knew about the judicial reforms, and they just sprung it on the people. And I think we can all agree that maybe some of the way that the judicial reform was pushed through may have not been presented in the best of light. May have not been there may have not been enough education on what it actually was. There's a lot of discussion on how the government handled the situation, but the government did campaign. A lot of these guys did campaign on saying we want to reform the judicial system, and they got the majority government. So there is a huge voice in Israel that is very supportive of the judicial reforms. And so this last weekend, Saturday night, tens of thousands of people showed up saying, hey, we want this to go forward. We want to reform the judicial system. The Matan Peleg, who's the chairman of Im Tertzu, who's one of the organizers of some of these events, said, quote, "We thank the tens of thousands of people who came out to the streets to express their support for the judicial reform. We won't let the anarchist harm the voters' decision. There's a duty to pass the reform so that there will be democracy here. The nation demands judicial reform. We live in a dictatorship of courts and the clerks. The nation chose judicial reform. The nation will win." And that's the end of the quote from the chairman of this pro-reform movement or pro-reform organization that is organizing some of these rallies. And it's very interesting because both sides here are a lot of times using the same language when they're talking about it. So we went to the protests in Tel Aviv, and everywhere there's all these signs saying, we don't want, dictatorship won't win. We want democracy. Our democracy is about to be, killed. Democracy is about to die because of the right-wing government, all this thing saying that Netanyahu is a dictator. Dictators always fall. So there's all these slogans going around. And then you have the guys on the right that are pro-reform that are that you're using the same language. They're both using the same language, just in different, completely different contexts, is going to the opposite extreme. And right here, he's saying that we live in a dictatorship of courts and clerks. So a lot of the people on the right have viewed the Supreme Court here in Israel as a dictatorship, mainly because it has been the way it's set up is in this way that they sort of self-appoint and self-elect new judges on their court. And throughout Israel's history, the majority of those judges have been very, very left-wing. So the right sees the Supreme Court as this sort of dictatorship because they reappoint themselves, and it's and it doesn't have. It's not controlled by the democratically elected, the government like that, which obviously there needs to be separations of power. But they see it in that way. And then the guys on the left are also saying that Netanyahu is a dictator, that the right-wing government, they hate the right-wing government, all these sort of things. So there's obviously a lot of untruths. There's untruths on both sides. There's not everything is being put forth in an exactly plain and factual manner. But what we do know, what we have seen, is that a lot of these left-wing leaders are kind of just pushing forth this rhetoric that seems to be kind of raising the temperature in Israel. We talked about that as well before. But just this last weekend as well, yesterday actually on Sunday, the National Unity Party chairman, Benny Gantz, spoke at a conference in Modi'in, and what he said in his speech there seemed to me to be continuing to push this polarization of these two camps in Israel, pro and anti this judicial reform. I'm going to read you what he said. He said, quote, "I'm not ready to give up on 1 millimeter of Israeli democracy. Let no one tell you stories about the so-called deals that are closed in the dark. That is a lie. I really want to reach agreements that will strengthen democracy and serve all of society. And I will do everything so that there will be no such thing as enemies of each other from within the state of Israel. I will devote my efforts so that this never happens." End quote. So that's Benny Gantz. So he's on the left. He's the head of the National Unity Party. And he's saying here that, well, first off, he says that the deals that have been going on, or the talks about compromise of judicial reform, that's all a lie. Basically, it's not happening, which is really strange because the president of Israel himself, Isaac Herzog, has been talking a lot about that. He himself is hosting these talks, mediating the talks between both of the camps. It's kind of been done. It's sort of like a behind closed doors. They haven't talked a lot about what they're discussing, but they're basically Herzog, the president of Israel, is trying to mediate a compromise between the left and right here in Israel for the judicial reforms, because Netanyahu said he will freeze it until the next session of the Knesset. And in the meantime, they're willing to enter into talks. So that's what's been happening. And now Benny Gantz, the guy on the left, is saying that, no, this is all a lie. They're not actually talking. Nothing's going to come from this. But it's what I find interesting. At the same time, he is saying all the right things when he's saying he wants to reach agreements that will strengthen democracy. And he wants to do everything so that there's no enemies from within the state of Israel. He's saying that while at the same time, he's pushing this very much anti-Netanyahu, anti-right-wing government, anti-everything this government is doing, he's against. But he doesn't want enemies inside the state of Israel. So obviously that's a lot what you get on the left when they're pushing for these policies. They're saying one thing, doing another, acting the complete opposite of that. And actually on the topic of compromise or mediation between both parties, There's actually just a report put out yesterday, I believe, that these talks have just produced a compromise on one of the key issues of the reforms. I think it's on the committee that appoints these judges. They have produced this compromise that could potentially work, where both sides might be happy. Now, whether that's going to take place, whether they agree on that, is a completely different story. But it is good to know that they are actually talking and they're pushing for something that may be an option moving forward when the Knesset when the Knesset convenes again here in a couple weeks. Our friends at Blessed by Israel ship the beautiful products of small businesses and families from Israel's heartland to people all around the world. You can now buy the wonderful tastes, smells, and goodness of the Promised Land. Check out the amazing extra virgin olive oil, savory spices, cosmetics, hand creams, soaps, lotion, chocolate, coffee, and much more. The best part about this is that at the same time as you are enjoying the goodness of the land of Israel, you are also blessing the faithful pioneers who are restoring Judea and Samaria. That's right, your purchases are an effective way to contribute to the strengthening of Israel. So head over to blessedbyisrael.com, that's blessed, B-U-Y, Israel.com, to buy the wonderful products of Israel's heartland and support the pioneers of Judea and Samaria. Again, that is blessed, B-U-Y, Israel.com. Link is in the description below. So I want to talk about something that has not received hardly any coverage in the media, and it was a very significant event, and you've seen other events that were at this scale that have been covered largely by the media, but this one specifically has not. And that was that last Monday there were 50,000 Israelis that came gathered here in Samaria and marched from Tepuach Junction to the location of Eviatar, which is a Jewish community that has been evacuated multiple times by the government of Israel. After it's happened several times where after terror attacks that have happened, Jews will go and they'll try to reestablish the community. They'll try to establish it again, like just start the community again, and then they'll be there for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then the government will come and push them out again. So there's been kind of that back and forth with Eviatar. So during Passover, the 50,000 Israelis that organized a march, 50,000 Israelis marched from the main junction here in Samaria, Tepuach Junction, to Eviatar. And this march is probably a mile, maybe a mile and a half from the junction to the community down the main highway there. And I wasn't actually able to attend the march, but I did drive past there, and there were tens of thousands of people. And we're going to show you a little bit about that in just a second. But what's crazy about this is that this event, this march, hardly got any coverage in the media about the amount of people that turned out, about what they were talking about, what they were promoting, what they were supporting, all this kind of stuff. And the coverage I did see was horribly negative in the mainstream media. CNN said that this event was provocative to the Palestinians in light of the recent escalations of violence. I'm paraphrasing what they say, but they did say provocative to the Palestinians in light of the recent escalations of violence. And I'm going to show you this video, and I want you guys to decide for yourself what you think here is provocative. And is this provocative to the Palestinians? And is CNN right here? Let's watch this video. you go. That showed you a little bit about the march and those that were organizing the march, talking about what they were there to do, what they were there to support, and that was life. Now, here, I actually agree with CNN for once, not in the way they were saying, because they were saying that the communities there is provocative to the Palestinians, and it's gonna cause them to do whatever, I don't know, go crazy. Whatever their meaning of saying that this is provocative in the escalation of violence. But let me tell you that this was, in a way, provocative to the Palestinians because, in the recent escalation of violence, because the only escalation of violence that has happened in recent weeks has been from Palestinian terrorists who have been murdering Jews. Now, let's not get this story mixed up. Let's not put it in the twisted way that CNN was trying to put it here. This is Palestinian terrorists who are escalating this violence, all the violence that you've heard about, the tensions, whatever, the cycle of violence that the media likes to call it. This has been Palestinian terrorists that have been trying and succeeding in many cases to murder Jews. So yes, I do think that what we just showed you, the march in Samaria last week, was a provocation to those Palestinian terrorists. And do you know why? Because the opposite of terrorism is life. And like they said in the video, that is what they're there to do. These beautiful people came together to voice their support for more life, more Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria equals life. And that's what all the Jewish communities all across Judea and Samaria, they represent and they promote, and that's what they want. They want more life. They want these amazing, beautiful families with children playing in the streets, kindergarten, schools, all these things. They want life, and that is their response when these terrorists come in and kill them. So let me get this headline right for you guys. Let's just say the headline should read, 50,000 people come together to show their support for life in Judea in Samaria. Guys, that's all for today. But as always, subscribe and get the conversation going down in the comments below. We love hearing your opinion on what is happening. And if you know things about or asking questions about what is happening here in Israel, we really enjoy interacting with you guys down in the comments. As always, tune out the fake news and tune into what is actually happening here in the land of Israel. We'll be back every day, Monday through Friday, with your direct connection to the land and people of Israel.